At night, the roads of Chihuahua, Mexico, hold an odd quiet. Not the calm type, but the type that carries the feeling of terrible things that happened before. In the years after 2000, something dark started growing under that quiet. Young men began to disappear. Their loved ones made reports. Officers started looking into cases, but many were shut down without answers, blamed on gang fighting, illegal substances, or simple misfortune. This continued until citizens began discovering human remains inside plastic trash bags, hidden in old tires, placed under broken houses, and next to them, toys meant for children. The first toy was thought to be garbage. The second made people curious. When the third appeared, a blood-stained tricycle wheel placed beside a cut-up body. The town understood something was deeply wrong. There was a murderer living among them, and he was making a statement. But what nobody realized then was that the murderer wasn't hiding in dark corners. He was already living in their neighborhoods, eating meals across from them at dinner tables. Andrés Ulysses Castillo Variel was the last person anyone would think of, and he was aware of it. Andrés was born in 1980 in Chihuahua City. His childhood years are mainly unrecorded, but there are enough pieces to show how the evil person developed. He was silent, kept to himself, and didn't get noticed in his classes. But on the inside, something was destroying him. When he was young, Andrés was attacked sexually many times by someone near to his relatives, a man he was supposed to feel safe with. To keep him from talking, the man would hand him toys, vehicles, action figures, colorful small items to take his mind off the harm. But the harm remained. Time went by. Andrés held the secret inside, but he never let it go. When he reached his 20s, Andrés had moved to the edges of normal life. He began selling methamphetamine, nothing major. He wasn't connected to a drug organization, just a street seller giving cheap drugs to people in the neighborhood. Most of his buyers were young males, some just finished with their education. Andrés acted friendly toward them, giving even. He'd provide more than what they bought. Extra hits, free transportation, sometimes a spot to sleep. But the kindness had a price, one the targets would never survive to realize. His first proven murder took place in 2009. Nobody paid attention at first. The target was listed as missing, but nothing about the case felt unusual. Simply another drug user who left in a dangerous town. 4 weeks later, a stray dog was discovered eating a person's arm in an unused area. A scientific examination connected the body parts back to the gone man. His remains had been cut apart and spread around. No genetic evidence at the location, no clues. Case shut, forgotten, and silent. But for Andrés, it was a success, and he continued. His method became more polished as time passed. He'd visit nearby drinking places, watch for his targets. He searched for young males, thin, dependent on drugs, needing a fix badly. He would sit in dark corners of these bars, drinking slowly, his eyes always moving across the room. He studied their body language, their desperation, the way they would check their phones nervously or scratch at their arms. He could spot the ones who were most vulnerable from across a crowded room. After he selected one, he'd start talking to them, give drugs or a location to use drugs safely. His approach was calculated and practiced. He would offer them a cigarette first, make small talk about the weather or local football. He'd complain about the high prices in the city, making himself seem relatable and trustworthy. Then he'd mention he had something better back at his place, something pure and strong. They'd go with him without thinking twice. At his place, the The setup was already ready. The room was clean, almost too clean. He'd have music playing softly in the background, something to make them feel comfortable and relaxed. He'd offer them a seat, maybe some water or a beer from his refrigerator. He'd make jokes, laugh with them, act like they were old friends catching up after years apart. All of this was part of the trap, making them lower their guard completely before the darkness emerged. He'd add something dangerous into their methamphetamine, an amount powerful enough to make them unconscious, but not end them. He would prepare this mixture carefully, measuring it precisely like a chemist in a laboratory. The substance would take effect slowly, gradually, so they wouldn't notice something was wrong until it was far too late. When they began losing awareness, he would observe, be patient, then he would attack. A heavy tool, a stone block, a steel pole, the choice didn't matter. He always aimed for the skull, fast, violent, and with shocking anger. But the murder wasn't the final act. It was the start. After death, he would abuse their remains sexually, sometimes right away, sometimes after washing up. The bathroom would run with water for hours during these moments, the sound covering what was happening inside those walls. Neighbors would later recall hearing the pipes running late into the night, but they never thought anything strange about it. In a city where everyone minded their own business, strange sounds were just part of living. He would then carefully cut them into pieces, always with the identical instrument. A worn cutting saw he stored in his washroom. Upper limbs, lower limbs, middle body, skull. He wasn't in a rush. The process could take hours, sometimes stretching into the early morning light. He would work methodically, almost mechanically, as if he was completing a routine household task rather than something horrific. The noise of the blade cutting through bone didn't upset him. If something, it made him concentrate better. Some investigators later theorized that this ritualistic process gave him a sense of control he'd never had as a child. Each cut, each separation, was him taking back power that had been stolen from him years ago. But this psychological explanation did nothing to ease the horror of what he'd done. Then came getting rid of evidence. He'd put the remains in containers or pails. Sometimes he'd take an old garden cart to transport them. Always during darkness, always by himself. He left them in waterless streams, deserted houses, forgotten spaces, places nobody remembered. But what made him well known was what he placed there. A plaything, a fake vehicle, a damaged toy figure, a section of a tricycle. Through the years, officers would discover more cut-up remains. Always males, always violently attacked, always placed with a child's plaything. Those investigating didn't understand the pattern at first. The remains were discovered in separate areas with different amounts of decay. There were no finger marks, no matching tools, just destruction. Then in November 2015, a 22-year-old named Lorenzo disappeared. He had recently arrived in Chihuahua to begin a new position. Good possibilities ahead, no criminal past. One evening he left for a meal and didn't return. 2 days after, his lower limbs were discovered covered in plastic containers inside an empty structure. Close by, a tiny red toy fire engine sat partly covered in the ground. 3 days after, his middle body and skull were discovered in a waterless channel. His head was crushed inward. Someone who saw them claimed they had noticed Lorenzo at a drinking place with a male-fitting Andrés' appearance. Officers questioned him, but held nothing solid. He showed a pleasant face, helped them, left without charges. 4 weeks after, a different man disappeared. Daniel, identical age, similar background. His body parts were pushed into a rubber tire only a few streets from where Lorenzo had been discovered. This occasion, a separate toy was placed. A toy figure without a head, limbs spread wide, facial features damaged from the heat. The newspapers covered the events. Local people started to fear. A repeat killer was free, but officers still held no strong clues. Then, in December, things shifted. Andrés had entered the residence of an acquaintance, Jesus, saying he was struggling financially and required a room. Jesus said yes, not knowing that only days before, Andrés had killed Daniel and placed his remains in the area. Shortly after entering, Andrés asked Jesus's brother, Fernando, to come for drinks. That evening, Andrés drugged and murdered Fernando in the extra bedroom, only a barrier away from where Jesus was sleeping. After finishing, he placed the remains beneath the floor panels and covered it closed with building material. Days went by. The odor increased. Jesus believed a rodent had passed away in the structure. Andrés said the same, even assisted him in searching. Then Andrés left, and Jesus discovered the floor. Inside was Fernando, his brother, rotting in the darkness, limbs twisted, facial features impossible to identify. Officers surrounded the residence, and this occasion they were prepared. Andrés was located 2 days after walking through a town square with a container of methamphetamine in his clothing. He didn't fight back, didn't talk. At the station, those investigating showed him proof from the location. Red fluid, genetic material, the saw, the garden cart. Someone living nearby had observed him disposing of something days before. A scientific group discovered traces of several targets' blood in his residence. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Blood samples matched missing persons from months and even years back. The saw had microscopic bone fragments embedded in its teeth. The cart's wheels had soil that matched dumping sites across the city. His silence was finished. While being questioned, Andrés admitted to 3 killings, but suggested there were more. His confession came in waves. Sometimes he would talk for minutes without stopping. Other times, he would sit in complete silence for over an hour. The detectives would bring him coffee, try different approaches, but he would only speak when he decided to. He seemed to enjoy having this final bit of control over the situation. When questioned why he placed the toys, he didn't respond immediately. The room went silent, everyone waiting for his answer. He stared down at his palms, moved his thumb against the rough part of his pointer finger. This went on for what felt like forever, though it was probably only 30 seconds. The detective asking the question was about to repeat it when Andrés finally looked up. Then he raised his eyes. "When I was young," he stated. "That's what they handed me to keep me silent." Nobody in the space moved. One of the investigators, a man who'd witnessed remains burned while living, drug gang murders, body cutting, supposedly got up and left the room. The fear wasn't from what Andrés had completed. It was from how normally he described it, like he was sharing with someone how he used to clean his mouth, as if the toys had been perfectly logical to him from the beginning. But for Andrés, the admission wasn't a mental collapse. It was an act. He talked in incomplete thoughts. Sometimes he was clear-minded, other occasions wandering in thought. He wouldn't give complete names, claimed he couldn't recall specific dates, said that many of the targets wished to be dead already. When pushed for a total count, he lifted his shoulders. 12, possibly higher. One officer questioned what occurred to the remaining remains, the ones that were never discovered. Andrés moved closer. "You'll never discover them," he said quietly. "They're below." He didn't explain what that suggested. As scientific groups searched the locations he'd stayed in, they started to find more than simply proof. In a small space under one rental property, they discovered tiny bones. Animal initially, then person. Under the floor panels of a small building he'd lived in during 2012. They discovered the grip of a saw placed in building material, red fluid still visible on it. Close to a different location, a child's plaything, burned, damaged by teeth, partly destroyed, was pushed between foundation stones. It hadn't been placed by mistake. Every murder location he made was filled with two types of fear: the violence itself and the ceremony of it. But what shocked those investigating even more than the murder locations was the normalcy in between. In the 6 years Andrés had been murdering, he'd been living normally. At different points he had done temporary work, yard maintenance, repairing engines, even teaching children mathematics for additional money. Parents would drop their kids off at his apartment for tutoring sessions, completely unaware of what had happened in that same space just days or weeks before. He was patient with the children, never raised his voice, always encouraging them when they solved problems correctly. He'd stayed with acquaintances, assisted neighbors in carrying food bags. One elderly woman later told reporters that Andrés had helped her every week for months, carrying her shopping up 3 flights of stairs without ever asking for payment. She said he was one of the kindest young men she'd ever met. Another neighbor remembered him fixing her broken fence for free, spending an entire weekend working on it in the hot sun. These acts of kindness made the truth even harder to accept when it finally came out. He was called by some as polite, silent, even kind. Not one time had someone reported him for strange actions, but there were warnings only clear when looking back. One neighbor recalled hearing pulling sounds late during darkness. A different person recalled a bad chemical odor, like cleaning liquid, and something more terrible. Multiple people claimed they'd observed him walking by himself with a child's plaything held under his limb. No child anywhere near. One female claimed she observed him moving an empty baby carrier down the road at 2 in the morning. Nobody questioned it. Not in Chihuahua. Not in a town where asking questions could get you harmed. The case spread across national news channels. He was labeled El Cuartizador de Chihuahua, the Chihuahua person who cuts bodies. Some newspapers named him El Reaper del Desierto Urbano, after the area where 2 of the most horrible remains had been discovered. Internet platforms turned his facial features into a symbol of current evil. Secret theories grew. Some thought he had helpers. Others claimed he was linked to religious groups. But the reality, officials stated, was much more disturbing. He had worked by himself. In the legal room, the relatives of the targets sat only short distance away from him. They looked. Some cried. Others burned with anger silently. Andrés never looked at them. Not one time. He kept his sight on the ground or on the judge. When questioned if he had something to tell the court, he showed the same frightening smile and stated, "Not every person makes noise." The room became frozen. In December 2017, he was given 120 years in prison. Mexico doesn't have death punishment, so this was as near to fairness as the relatives would receive. He was sent to a highest protection building in the middle of the nation, removed from public sight, removed from the town whose ground still contained the secrets he placed. In the time that came after, stories kept circulating. At minimum, 5 gone persons cases from 2010 to 2014 had likenesses to Andrés's known ways. Body cutting, male targets, spots near empty structures, and tiny plastic playthings placed close by. But without an admission or strong proof, Legal workers couldn't restart the cases. The time limit in Mexico doesn't end on murder, but the evidence had become forgotten. In the meantime, news writers and non-professional investigators started examining Andrés's history. A self-employed crime reporter found that when Andrés was 10, he had told the attack to a school helper. The account had been written down, but no steps were completed. The male blamed had relocated towns within a few months. The paperwork was destroyed years after in water damage. No legal actions were ever started. A different disturbing fact came out. During his youth years, Andrés had been taken to medical care for wounds he caused himself. He had made shapes into his chest area using sharp glass pieces, circular patterns, pointing marks, one occasion a crossing mark. A mental health doctor had identified him with separation shock, but once more, no continuing help was provided. The relatives couldn't pay for it. He vanished from paperwork for almost 10 years after that, until the remains started appearing. Currently, citizens in Chihuahua still refuse to speak his name out loud. The previous houses where he stayed have been emptied or torn down. Area children claim they're filled with spirits. That during darkness, if you pass by the Desierto Urbano area, you can still hear the sound of a toy wheel moving in the air. Thanks for viewing. If you liked the video, don't forget to press like and follow. And if you'd want to help the channel more directly, think about becoming a channel supporter. It really means everything and helps continue these stories being made. Meet you in the following one.